Welcome to Lesson 1 in Science. How are animals grouped? All animals have the same basic needs. Animals might be grouped by how they look, where they live, or how they act. What all animals need. Right there's an example of a heading. So everything that we read in these next paragraphs will all be about what all animals need. Nearly all animals need water, oxygen, food, and shelter to live. Animals can get water from drinking or from the foods they eat. All animals also need the gas oxygen. They get oxygen from the air or from water. Most animals that live on land have lungs to breathe in oxygen. Many animals that live in water, such as fish, breathe with gills. Animals also need food and shelter. They get their food by eating plants or other animals. Shelters protect animals from the weather and from other animals. While some mammals build or seek shelters, others use their own hard shells as their homes. Needs of animals: water, oxygen, food, and shelter. And here's a checkpoint question we're going to talk about in class. The question is, what do all animals need? Now, since we've just read it carefully, all we have to do is go back up and scan for what all animals need. And we can see in the first paragraph it says water, oxygen, food, and shelter. And that's what these whole two paragraphs were telling us. Let's turn the page. Now we're on page 40. And the heading is Ways of Grouping Animals. How we group animals depends on what we want to learn about them. Sometimes animals are grouped by where they live or how they act. They also may be grouped by how they look. The body feature passed on to an animal from its parents is called a trait. Traits sometimes include things an animal does. One animal might be placed into different groups. For example, a group of animals that eat mice can include snakes, hawks, and owls. A group of animals that fly would also include hawks and owls, but not snakes. Animals with backbones. Another way to group animals is by whether or not they have a backbone. An animal with a backbone is called a vertebrate. Cats, dogs, and birds are vertebrates. So are fish and snakes. Even though all these animals look very different, each one has a backbone, and that backbone grows as the animal grows. So here is an example of a vertebrate. That's a lynx, and it says this lynx is a vertebrate because it has a backbone. Right there. Page 41. Groups of vertebrates. Here we have fish. These vertebrates spend their entire lives in fresh water, ocean water, or both. Most fish have slippery scales and breathe through gills. So here's an example of fish. Next we have amphibians. There's an interesting word, amphibians. Frogs, foods, and salamanders belong to a group called amphibians. Many amphibians spend part of their lives in water and part on land. Most young amphibians live in water. They get oxygen through gills and through their smooth, moist skin. As they grow, most amphibians develop lungs that they use to breathe air. And here's an example. There's a frog there. Next are reptiles, another kind of vertebrate. Snakes, lizards, turtles, crocodiles, and alligators are reptiles. They mostly have dry, scaly skin. These vertebrates breathe air through lungs. There's the example of one, a snake. And then we have birds. Birds are vertebrates with feathers and bills that do not have teeth. They breathe air through lungs. Wings and light bones help most birds fly. Their coats of feathers help them stay warm. And there's birds. And then we have mammals. The vertebrates that you probably know best are called mammals. Mammals have hair, at least during part of their lives. The hair keeps them warm. Mammals breathe air through lungs and feed milk to their young. And here's a checkpoint question we'll talk about in class. Should reptiles and amphibians be grouped together? Explain your answer. So there's something we'll talk about in class tomorrow. Okay, and turning the page. Next page we have, on page 42, animals without backbones. In addition to a backbone, vertebrates also have other bones. Their bones give them strong support for their bodies. This allows many vertebrates, such as elephants, to be very big. Most animals, however, do not have skeletons made of bone inside their bodies. These are the animals without backbones, or invertebrates. Examples include sea stars, butterflies, and spiders. A soft sac filled with liquid supports worms and sea jellies. A hard shell supports clams and lobsters. These structures would be bulky and weigh too much on big animals. For this reason, invertebrates do not get as big as vertebrates can get. It's hard sometimes to notice invertebrates because they usually are so small. But invertebrates are everywhere on Earth. In fact, there are many more invertebrates than vertebrates. For instance, several million roundworms, each too tiny to see, may live under a square yard of soil. There are also many more kinds of invertebrates than vertebrates, as the chart at the top of the page shows. So here's the chart. This red section in the chart right here, that represents the vertebrates out of all the different kinds of animals. This section represents how many vertebrates there are in the world. And this big green section, that represents all of the invertebrates that we have on Earth. So you can see there's a whole lot more invertebrates than there are vertebrates. And the caption says, "This whole circle stands for all kinds of animals. The small piece shows that kinds of vertebrates are only a small part of the total." Kinds of invertebrate animals. Here's another chart we see. This shows most kinds of invertebrates are insects. See this big purple section right here? This represents all the insects. And the green section are mollusks. And then the yellow section we have worms. And this little bit here we have sea jellies. And then this blue section are other arthropods. And we'll talk about what all those are coming up on the next page. As we have a chart that says major kinds of invertebrate animals on page 43. And first it talks about sea jellies. Sea jellies have soft bodies and long, stinging body parts. The body of a sea jelly is made mostly of water. A sea jelly uses its stingers to stun its prey before pulling it into its stomach. Most sea jellies live in the ocean. And there's an example of what one looks like. Next we have worms. Worms are animals with long, soft bodies and no legs. You've probably seen an earthworm in the soil. These invertebrates help keep soil healthy. And there's an example of an earthworm right there. And it looks like we have a special guest for this broadcast in science. And let's see what this is an example of. Over here we have a cat. This is Sylvester. Sylvester would be an example of a vertebrate because he has a backbone right there, Sylvester? And he is also a mammal as he has fur, and cats feed milk to their young and are born live. Okay, thank you, Sylvester, for being a special guest on our show. Now, back to our science. Okay, back to invertebrates. So we just read about worms, and now, what were mollusks? Well, let's find out. Mollusks, a different kind of invertebrate. Mollusks are animals with soft bodies. Some mollusks include the octopus, squid, clam, and snail. Many mollusks have a hard shell. So here's an example of one right there. There's a snail. Like the snail in the movie Turbo. Okay, next we have arthropods. These animals are members of the largest group of invertebrates. They wear their skeletons outside their bodies. The bodies of arthropods are made up of more than one main part, and they have legs with joints. Insects, spiders, and crabs are all arthropods. There's an example of some arthropods right there. Okay, and now another checkpoint question that we'll talk about in class. If a rattlesnake and a black widow spider both make poison, why are they put in different groups? Something to think about for our class discussion tomorrow. And we will see you then. Can you say goodbye, Sylvester? Oh, it looks like he's being a little shy today. So we will talk about this one in class. And join us. Our next reading will be Lesson 2. How do animals grow and change?